My name is Margaret Elizabeth Sullivan, and this is the story of how Mother's Day became the day I finally stopped being a doormat for my own son. It's a story about a gift that changed everything, a disappearance that saved a relationship, and the moment I learned that sometimes you have to lose someone to teach them how to love you. But let me start at the beginning, because the real story started long before that fateful Mother's Day morning. I was 19 when I got pregnant with Michael. Fresh out of my first year of college, scared out of my mind, and completely unprepared for motherhood. His father, David, was 21 and even less ready than I was. We got married in a courthouse ceremony with my mother as our only witness, both of us wearing clothes we'd borrowed from friends because we couldn't afford anything new. Those first few years were the hardest of my life, but also the most beautiful. David was trying to establish himself in construction work, often gone for weeks at a time on job sites across the state. I was alone with Michael most days, working part-time at a daycare center where I could bring him with me, taking night classes to finish my degree whenever David was home to watch the baby. Michael was the kind of child who made all the sleepless nights and financial struggles worth it. He was curious about everything, affectionate, incredibly bright. At 2 years old, he could carry on conversations that amazed other adults. At 4, he was reading chapter books. At 6, he was asking questions about quantum physics because he'd seen something about it on a nature documentary. "That boy's going to change the world someday," my mother used to say, watching him build elaborate structures out of blocks or explain his latest theory about why the sky was blue. I believed her. I believed that Michael was destined for greatness, and I was determined to do everything in my power to help him achieve it. I worked extra shifts at the daycare to pay for enrichment classes. I spent hours helping with homework projects that other parents would have thrown together in 20 minutes. I drove 40 minutes each way to take him to a better school district because the local schools weren't challenging enough for him. David started complaining that I was spoiling Michael, that I was too focused on our son and not enough on our marriage. He wasn't entirely wrong. I was devoted to Michael in a way that probably wasn't healthy for any of us. But I told myself that this was what good mothers did. They sacrificed for their children. They put their children's needs first, always. When Michael was 12, David left us. Not in a dramatic, angry way, but quietly, like he was just tired of competing for my attention and had finally given up. I came home from work one Tuesday to find a note on the kitchen table explaining that he'd taken a job in Oregon and wouldn't be coming back. He'd packed his clothes and some tools and left everything else behind, including his son. Michael took the abandonment hard. He blamed himself, convinced that if he'd been different somehow, better somehow, his father would have stayed. I spent months trying to reassure him that David's leaving had nothing to do with him, that it was about problems between adults that Michael couldn't understand or fix. But privately, I blamed myself too. I'd been so focused on being the perfect mother that I'd forgotten how to be a wife. I'd prioritized Michael's happiness over everyone else's, including my own, and it had cost me my marriage. So I doubled down on motherhood. I told myself that Michael and I were a team now, that we only needed each other. I took on extra work to pay for the house and Michael's activities. I never dated, never even considered it, because I didn't want Michael to feel like he was competing for my attention again. I arranged my entire life around his schedule. I planned our vacations around his interests. I made friends with other single mothers who understood that children came first, always. I became the mother who chaperoned every field trip, who volunteered for every school committee, who never missed a game or a concert or a science fair. And Michael thrived. He was valedictorian of his high school class, earned a full scholarship to college, graduated with honors. Everyone said I'd done an amazing job raising him alone. Everyone said he was lucky to have such a devoted mother. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Michael went from being grateful for my sacrifices to expecting them. He went from appreciating my support to taking it for granted. He went from seeing me as his champion to seeing me as, I don't know, a convenience maybe. A resource that would always be available whenever he needed something. It started small. In college, he called when he needed money or when he was stressed about exams, but rarely just to chat. When he graduated and got his first job in marketing, he moved to an apartment across town but rarely visited unless he needed something. A home-cooked meal when he was tired of takeout. Help moving furniture. Someone to watch his cat when he went out of town. I told myself this was normal. He was a young man establishing his independence. It was healthy for him to build his own life. I should be proud that I'd raised someone so capable and self-sufficient. But deep down, I felt like I was disappearing from his life. Not all at once, but gradually, like a photograph left in the sun, slowly fading until you could barely make out the image that used to be there. I started teaching high school English when Michael was in college, partly because I'd always loved literature, but mostly because I needed something to fill the hours when I wasn't needed as a mother anymore. It was good work, meaningful work, and I was good at it. My students liked me, my colleagues respected me, and I found real satisfaction in helping teenagers discover the power of words and stories. But even teaching felt like something I did in the spaces between being Michael's mother. When he called with a crisis or a need, I dropped everything. When he wanted to have lunch, I rearranged my plans. When he went through a difficult breakup in his mid-20s, I spent hours on the phone listening to him process his feelings, offering advice and comfort and reassurance. I was always available, always understanding, always willing to put his needs ahead of my own plans or preferences or feelings. Then he met Amanda. Amanda was 23 to Michael's 28. Fresh out of college with a marketing degree and a job at a trendy agency downtown. She was beautiful in that effortless way that young women are beautiful, with long blonde hair and the kind of metabolism that let her eat whatever she wanted without consequences. She was smart and ambitious and had the quiet confidence that comes from never having to doubt your place in the world. I liked her immediately, and that worried me. Because I could see how perfect she was for Michael, how well they fit together, and I knew that meant my role in his life was about to change again. The first time Michael brought Amanda to Sunday dinner, I watched them together and felt a mixture of joy and fear that surprised me with its intensity. Joy because Michael was clearly happy, more relaxed and confident than I'd seen him in years. Fear because I could see my future stretching out ahead of me. A future where I was no longer the most important woman in my son's life. Amanda was polite to me, but distant. Not rude, exactly, but careful. She called me Mrs. Sullivan, even when I asked her to call me Margaret. She complimented my cooking but never asked for recipes. She answered my questions about her family and her work, but never asked questions about mine. I told myself she was just shy, that she needed time to warm up to me. But as months passed and she remained politely distant, I started to suspect that the distance was intentional. That maybe Michael had told her things about me that made her wary. That maybe she saw me as a threat to her relationship with my son. The Sunday dinners became less frequent. Michael would call to cancel, explaining that Amanda's family was having something, or they'd been invited to a friend's house, or they were just too tired from work. He always sounded slightly apologetic, but never offered to reschedule. Our weekly phone calls became bi-weekly, then monthly. When I called him, he often seemed distracted, like he was checking his phone or watching TV while we talked. Our conversations became shorter, more superficial. He'd ask how I was doing, but in the way people ask when they're hoping for a quick, positive answer. I started to feel like I was bothering him. Like my need for connection with my son was an inconvenience in his busy, important adult life. When Michael told me he and Amanda were moving in together, I smiled and congratulated him and told him how happy I was for them. And I was happy for him, genuinely. But I was also terrified, because I could see the writing on the wall. I was being gently but firmly pushed to the margins of my son's life. The apartment they chose was farther from my house, in a trendy neighborhood near Amanda's work. They decorated it in the minimalist style that young people favor now, all clean lines and neutral colors. There were no photos of Michael's childhood, no mementos from our family vacations, nothing that acknowledged the 26 years of life he'd lived before Amanda came along. I visited once, when they first moved in, bringing a housewarming gift I'd spent too much money on. Amanda gave me a tour while Michael was at work, and I could tell she was proud of their space. It was beautiful, undeniably so. But it felt like a hotel room to me, sterile and impersonal. "It's lovely," I said, because it was. "You have such good taste." "Thank you," Amanda replied. "Michael let me handle most of the decorating. He said he didn't really care about that stuff." The casual way she dismissed Michael's input bothered me, but I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place to comment on their relationship dynamics. I was just the mother now, relegated to occasional visits and holiday obligations. That Christmas was the first time in 26 years that Michael didn't spend Christmas morning with me. He and Amanda went to her family's house in Connecticut, and I spent the morning alone, opening the gifts I'd bought for myself so there would be something under the tree. Michael called that afternoon, his voice bright with alcohol and other people's happiness, to wish me a Merry Christmas and tell me about Amanda's family's traditions. They'd opened presents early, then had a big brunch with extended family. Amanda's mother had given Amanda a beautiful necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Amanda's father had told funny stories about Amanda's childhood. "It sounds wonderful," I said, and meant it. But after we hung up, I sat in my quiet house surrounded by the decorations I'd put up for no one but myself, and wondered when I'd become an afterthought in my own son's life. New Year's Eve came and went without a call. Valentine's Day passed unacknowledged. In March, I called to tell Michael about a promotion I'd received at school, a department head position I'd been working toward for years. He congratulated me, but I could tell he was distracted. In the background, I could hear Amanda calling his name. "I should go," he said. "But that's great about the promotion, Mom. Really great." "Thank you," I said. "I'm pretty excited about it." "You should be. Okay, I'll talk to you soon." But soon turned into 3 weeks, then 4. When I finally called him, he sounded surprised to hear from me, like he'd forgotten I existed. "Oh, hey, Mom. How are you? Sorry I haven't called. Work's been crazy, and Amanda's been planning this big presentation for her boss." "That's okay," I said, because what else could I say? I just wanted to check in. "Yeah, things are good. Really good. Amanda might get promoted if this presentation goes well." "That's wonderful. I hope it goes perfectly." "Thanks. I should go though. We're having dinner with some of her colleagues tonight, and I need to change clothes." "Of course. Have a good time." "Will do. Love you, Mom." "Love you too." But as I hung up the phone, I wondered if he really did love me, or if he just said it out of habit. When someone loves you, don't they want to spend time with you? Don't they show interest in your life? Don't they prioritize you, at least occasionally? I started paying attention to how other adult children treated their parents. I noticed my colleague Sarah talking about her weekly lunch dates with her daughter. I saw my neighbor Tom helping his elderly father with yard work every Saturday. I watched my student Jake's mother come to his graduation, beaming with pride as he walked across the stage. And I realized that what Michael and I had wasn't normal. It wasn't healthy, I trained him to take me for granted, and he'd learned the lesson perfectly. That's when I started planning my own Mother's Day celebration. For 27 years, I'd waited for Michael to remember Mother's Day. Some years he did, some years he didn't. When he remembered, it was usually flowers from the grocery store and a card with a generic message. When he forgot, he'd call a few days later with an apology and a promise to make it up to me. But this year, I decided, was going to be different. This year, I was going to plan something special for us. I was going to make a reservation at a nice restaurant, and we were going to have a real conversation, the kind we used to have when he was younger. I was going to ask about his work and his relationship and his dreams for the future, and I was going to share things about my own life that I'd been keeping to myself. I was going to treat Mother's Day like the celebration of our relationship that it was supposed to be. I called Michael 2 weeks before Mother's Day to tell him about my plan. I made us a reservation at Chez Laurent for Mother's Day, I said, trying to keep my voice light and casual. You know, that French place downtown? I thought it would be nice to have a real celebration this year. There was a pause. Oh, that sounds nice, Mom. What time? Noon. I thought we could make an afternoon of it. Maybe walk around downtown afterward if the weather's nice. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll put it in my calendar. Wonderful. I'm really looking forward to it. Me too. Okay, I need to get going, but I'll see you on Mother's Day. For 2 weeks I look forward to that lunch like a teenager looks forward to prom. I bought a new dress, a soft blue one that brought out my eyes. I made an appointment to get my hair done. I even bought myself flowers for the house because I wanted everything to be perfect when I got home from our celebration. I imagined our conversation over lunch. I would tell Michael about the book I was reading, a biography of Virginia Woolf that I was finding fascinating. I would ask him about his job, really ask, not just accept his usual fine or busy answers. I would tell him about my plans to apply for that fellowship to study at Oxford, the dream I'd been nurturing in secret for months. Maybe, I thought, this would be the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. Maybe we could become friends, not just mother and son. Maybe he would start seeing me as a person with her own interests and dreams, not just as the woman who had raised him. The morning of Mother's Day dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect May days that feels like a promise of summer. I woke up early, made myself coffee in my favorite mug, and sat on my back porch watching the birds in my garden. I planted that garden when Michael was in high school, choosing flowers that would bloom at different times throughout the year so there would always be something beautiful to look at. The lilacs were at their peak, filling the air with their sweet, intoxicating scent. The roses were just beginning to bud, promising an explosion of color in the coming weeks. The herb garden I'd started last year was thriving, basil and rosemary and thyme growing wild and fragrant. I felt peaceful, happy, optimistic about the day ahead. At 11:30, I put on my new blue dress and drove to the restaurant, arriving a few minutes early so I could make sure our table was ready. Chez Laurent was busy, filled with families celebrating Mother's Day. I saw mothers with young children, grandmothers surrounded by multiple generations, women my age being treated to lunch by their grown children. Everyone looked happy, festive, loved. The hostess seated me at a table by the window, and I ordered a glass of wine while I waited for Michael. The restaurant was lovely, with soft music and fresh flowers on every table. Through the window, I could see downtown bustling with people enjoying the beautiful weather. At 12:15, I started to worry. Michael was usually punctual, and 15 minutes late was unusual for him. I checked my phone to see if he'd sent a message, but there was nothing. At 12:30, I called him. "Hey, Mom," he answered, and I could immediately tell something was wrong. His voice was strained, apologetic. "I'm so sorry, but I can't make it to lunch." My heart sank, but I tried to keep my voice steady. What happened? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm fine. It's just, Amanda's mom invited us to this Mother's Day brunch at her country club, and Amanda really wants me to be there. Her whole family is going to be there, and she says it's important for me to make a good impression. I sat in that restaurant, surrounded by families celebrating together, and felt something inside me break. Not break dramatically, like glass shattering, but break quietly, like a heart that's been holding too much weight for too long finally giving way. But Michael, I said, we've had these plans for 2 weeks. I made a reservation. I'm already here. I know, and I feel terrible about it, but Amanda's really stressed about this, and I don't want to disappoint her family. You understand, right? You're always so understanding about these things. There it was. The assumption that I would be understanding, that I would accept this disappointment gracefully, that I would put his convenience ahead of my own feelings. Again. Her family? I said. What about your family, Michael? What about me? Mom, don't be like that. You know you're important to me. We can reschedule. Maybe next weekend? Next weekend isn't Mother's Day. I know, but it's just a day, right? We can celebrate any time. Just a day. 27 years of Mother's Days, and to him, it was just a day. Where are you? I asked. At Amanda's apartment. We're getting ready to leave for the country club. Her mom is picking us up in like 10 minutes. Are you dressed up? Yeah, Amanda bought me a new tie for the occasion. Why? A new tie for Amanda's family, but he couldn't be bothered to show up for his own mother. Just curious, I said. Well, have fun at the brunch. Thanks, Mom. And again, I'm really sorry about lunch. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Sure, I said. I'll talk to you later. I hung up the phone and sat there for a moment, staring at the empty chair across from me. Around me, the restaurant buzzed with conversation and laughter. A little girl at the next table was presenting her mother with a handmade card, beaming with pride. An elderly woman was opening a gift from her daughter, her face lighting up with delight. And there I was, alone at a table for two, wearing my new blue dress for no one. The waitress approached hesitantly. Are you still waiting for someone? Or would you like to order? I'll order, I said. It's just me today. If she felt sorry for me, she didn't show it. She simply smiled and handed me a menu. The salmon is excellent today, she said. Very popular. I'll have the salmon, I said, not because I particularly wanted it, but because it seemed easier than making another decision. As I ate my lunch alone, I found myself really looking at the other tables, really watching the families around me. And what I saw broke my heart all over again. I saw adult children who had clearly made an effort for their mothers. Sons in pressed shirts and ties, daughters in pretty dresses and carefully applied makeup. I saw conversations that looked genuine, engaged, like both parties were enjoying themselves. I saw mothers being treated like honored guests at their own celebrations, not like obligatory appointments to be squeezed in between more important plans. At the table next to mine, a woman about my age was having lunch with her son and daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law was showing her photos on her phone, and all three of them were laughing at something. The son reached over to refill his mother's wine glass without being asked. The daughter-in-law complimented the mother's necklace and asked where she'd gotten it. They looked like they enjoyed each other's company. They looked like family. When had Michael and I stopped looking like family? I was halfway through my salmon when my phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe Michael had changed his mind. Maybe he was on his way. Instead, it was a photo. Michael and Amanda at an elaborate buffet, surrounded by Amanda's family. Amanda's mother, a perfectly coiffed woman in an expensive-looking dress, had her arm around Michael. Amanda was laughing at something someone had said, her hand resting possessively on Michael's arm. Michael himself looked relaxed, happy, like he belonged in that picture. The caption read, "Amazing Mother's Day Brunch. Amanda's mom knows how to throw a party. Thanks for understanding, Mom." I stared at that photo for a long time. Michael looked genuinely happy, more genuinely happy than I'd seen him look in months. He was laughing, engaged, present in a way he hadn't been during our last few conversations. And I realized that the problem wasn't that Michael didn't know how to appreciate family. The problem was that he'd found a new family, one that felt more exciting and important than the old one. One that didn't include me. I paid my check and walked to my car in a daze. The beautiful May afternoon suddenly felt cold, despite the sunshine. Other families were walking downtown, some heading to restaurants for late lunches, others browsing the shops and enjoying the weather. I sat in my car for a few minutes, not sure where to go or what to do with the rest of my day. I could go home, change out of my blue dress and pretend this hadn't happened. I could call my sister in California and complain about Michael's behavior. I could grade papers or work in my garden or do any of the 1,000 things I usually did to fill my empty hours. Instead, I drove to the bookstore. I'd always found comfort in bookstores, and this one was my favorite. A small independent shop downtown with creaky floors and overstuffed chairs and the kind of knowledgeable staff who could recommend exactly the book you needed, even if you didn't know you needed it. I wandered the aisles aimlessly, not looking for anything in particular, just needing to be somewhere that felt peaceful and safe. I found myself in the travel section, looking at guidebooks for places I'd always dreamed of visiting but never had the courage to go to alone. Scotland, England, Ireland, Italy, France. I picked up a guidebook to Scotland and flipped through it, looking at photos of castles and rolling green hills and ancient stone circles. I'd always wanted to visit Scotland, ever since I'd fallen in love with the poetry of Robert Burns in college. I'd imagined walking where he'd walked, seeing the landscapes that had inspired his words. But I'd never gone, because Michael might need me. Because single mothers don't just disappear on solo vacations. Because responsible people don't spend money on frivolous things like travel when there are bills to pay and retirement to save for. Planning a trip? A voice behind me asked. I turned to see a woman about my age, with silver hair and kind eyes. She was holding a guidebook to Italy. "Oh no," I said automatically. "Just dreaming." "I used to just dream too," she said, smiling. Then my daughter graduated from college and moved across the country for her job. I realized I could keep waiting for someday, or I could start living my life now. "Did you go to Italy?" I asked. "Last year. It was incredible. Scary as hell, traveling alone at my age, but incredible." She paused, studying my face. "Rough Mother's Day?" I must have looked as pathetic as I felt, because she didn't wait for an answer. "Let me guess," she continued. "Adult child too busy to spend time with you? More important plans?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "My daughter forgot entirely last year," she said matter-of-factly. "Didn't even call. That's when I decided that if she wasn't going to make me a priority, I needed to start making myself one." "How?" I asked. "I booked that trip to Italy. I bought myself the most beautiful Mother's Day gift I could think of. And I stopped waiting for other people to make me feel valued." She handed me her business card. It said, "Janet Morrison, Travel Consultant." "If you ever decide you're ready to stop dreaming and start doing," she said, "give me a call. Life's too short to spend it waiting for other people to appreciate you." After she left, I stood in that bookstore holding a guidebook to Scotland and her business card, and something shifted inside me. Not all at once, but gradually, like tectonic plates moving deep underground. I bought the guidebook. I drove home and changed out of my blue dress, hanging it in my closet next to all the other clothes I'd bought for occasions that never materialized or proved disappointing. Then I sat at my kitchen table with the Scotland guidebook and my laptop, and I started researching flights. It was crazy. Completely, utterly crazy. I didn't travel alone. I didn't make impulsive decisions. I didn't spend money on myself when there were more practical things I could spend it on. But as I looked at flight prices and hotel reviews and train schedules, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Excitement, anticipation, the thrill of possibility. I could go to Scotland. I could see Edinburgh Castle and the Highlands and the Isle of Skye. I could walk where Robert Burns had walked and stand where Mary Queen of Scots had stood. I could eat haggis and drink whiskey and listen to bagpipe music in its native land. I could do all of this, and Michael would never even know I was gone. That thought stopped me cold. Michael would never even know I was gone. How had I become so invisible in my own son's life that I could disappear for a week and he wouldn't notice? I closed the laptop and went to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that photo Michael had sent, about how happy he'd looked at Amanda's family brunch, about how easily he'd canceled our plans, about how he'd said it was just a day when I tried to explain that Mother's Day mattered to me. The next morning, I called in sick to work. Not because I was physically ill, but because I couldn't face a day of pretending everything was normal when my entire world felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. I spent the morning in my garden, pulling weeds and deadheading flowers, trying to find some peace in the rhythm of familiar tasks. But even my garden, which had always been my sanctuary, felt different now. It felt like a beautiful prison, a place where I'd contained myself for years while the world moved on without me. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Michael. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice carefully cheerful. "How was the rest of your Mother's Day?" "Fine," I said, because what else could I say? That I'd eaten alone at the restaurant where we were supposed to have lunch? That I'd spent the afternoon in a bookstore planning imaginary trips because my real life had become too small to sustain me? Good. Listen, I wanted to apologize again about yesterday. I know you were disappointed. I was, I said simply. I'll make it up to you, I promise. Maybe we can have lunch this weekend. Maybe, I said, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel particularly interested in his offer to make it up to me. Making it up to me implied that he'd done something wrong by accident, that he felt bad about hurting my feelings and wanted to fix it. But this hadn't been an accident. He'd made a choice, and he'd chosen Amanda's family over mine. He'd chosen convenience over commitment. He'd chosen the new and exciting over the old and reliable. "Are you okay, Mom? You sound different." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." "Okay. Well, I'll call you later in the week and we'll figure out a time to get together." "Sure," I said, knowing that he probably wouldn't call later in the week, and that if he did, it would be to cancel whatever plans we made. After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, surrounded by the flowers I'd planted and tended for years. The lilacs were starting to fade, their purple blossoms browning at the edges. The roses were blooming now, but I knew they'd only last a few weeks before the summer heat made them droop and wither. Everything beautiful was temporary. Everything you loved eventually left or died or stopped mattering to the people who were supposed to care about it. But then I looked closer at my garden and realized I was wrong. The flowers were temporary, yes, but the garden itself endured. Every year, it came back. Every spring, it bloomed again, more beautiful than the year before. Maybe that was the lesson I needed to learn. Maybe I needed to stop being a temporary flower in other people's gardens and start being the gardener of my own life. That afternoon, I opened my laptop again and booked a flight to Scotland. Not a tentative, refundable booking that I could cancel if Michael needed me or if I lost my nerve. A real booking, with real dates and real consequences. I would leave in 3 weeks and be gone for 10 days. I would see Edinburgh in the Highlands and everything I dreamed about for years. And then, because I was apparently having some kind of breakdown or breakthrough or both, I did something even more radical. I started writing a letter to Michael. Not an angry letter or a hurt letter, but an honest one. A letter that said all the things I'd been thinking but had been too afraid to say out loud. My dearest Michael, I wrote, by the time you read this letter, I'll be on a plane to Scotland. Not because I'm running away, but because I'm running toward something. Toward the life I've been putting on hold for 28 years. Toward the woman I used to be before I became so focused on being your mother that I forgot to be myself. I wrote about the Mother's Day lunch, about sitting alone in that restaurant while he chose someone else's family over mine. I wrote about the years of canceled plans and forgotten birthdays and phone calls that felt more like obligations than connections. I wrote about how I'd trained him to take me for granted by never asking for anything, never complaining, never setting boundaries. But I also wrote about my love for him, about how proud I was of the man he'd become, about how much I'd enjoyed being his mother during the years when he'd wanted and needed me. I don't want you to feel guilty, I wrote. I want you to understand. There's a difference between feeling guilty and feeling motivated to change. Guilt is about the past, and there's nothing we can do about the past. But motivation is about the future, and we can absolutely do something about that. I wrote about my trip to Scotland, about the dreams I'd been nurturing in secret, about the life I wanted to build for myself now that he'd built his own life. I'm not disappearing forever, I wrote. I'm just disappearing long enough for both of us to figure out what our relationship looks like when it's based on choice instead of obligation. When it's based on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. I printed the letter and sealed it in an envelope with his name on it. Then I wrapped it with the Scotland guidebook I'd bought, creating a package that looked like a gift but was actually a declaration of independence. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and planning. I arranged for a substitute teacher to cover my classes. I booked hotels and train tickets and tours. I bought new clothes suitable for Scottish weather. I researched restaurants and museums and hiking trails. I told my colleagues I was taking a vacation, but I didn't tell them where I was going or why. I told my neighbors I'd be away, but I didn't give them details. I told my sister I was traveling, but I was vague about the specifics. The only person I didn't tell was Michael. He called twice during those 3 weeks, brief conversations about nothing in particular. Both times, he seemed distracted, like he was multitasking while we talked. Both times, he mentioned getting together soon, but didn't suggest any specific plans. I could have told him about my trip during either of those calls. I could have said, by the way, I'm going to Scotland next week. But I didn't, because I wanted him to discover my absence the way I discovered his indifference. Suddenly, unexpectedly, with a shock of realization about what he'd been taking for granted. The night before my departure, I drove to Michael's apartment and left the package by his door. My hands were shaking as I placed it there, but I didn't hesitate. I'd been planning this moment for 3 weeks, and I was ready. Then I drove home, finished packing, and tried to sleep. I woke up at 4 in the morning, too excited and nervous to stay in bed any longer. I made coffee and toast and sat in my kitchen one last time, looking around at the house that had been my sanctuary and my prison for so many years. It was a good house. I'd bought it with my divorce settlement and teacher's salary, chosen it carefully for its good school district and safe neighborhood and proximity to Michael's activities. I'd painted every room myself, planted every flower in the garden, fixed every broken thing with my own 2 hands or money I'd earned myself. It was a house that reflected my priorities, my values, my choices, but it was also a house that felt empty now, because I'd built my life around a person who no longer needed or wanted to be at the center of it. Maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time for my house to reflect new priorities, new choices, new possibilities. I called a taxi to take me to the airport because I didn't want to leave my car in long-term parking. As we pulled away from my house, I looked back at it once, then turned my attention to the road ahead. The flight to Edinburgh was the longest flight I'd ever taken, 11 hours of sitting with my thoughts and my fears and my excitement. I'd never traveled internationally alone, never made such a dramatic gesture, never done anything so completely outside my careful, responsible character. But as the plane lifted off from Boston and I watched the familiar landscape disappear beneath the clouds, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt free. I arrived in Edinburgh on a gray, misty morning that looked exactly like the Scotland of my imagination. The city was ancient and beautiful, with cobblestone streets and medieval buildings and a castle perched on a hill overlooking everything. I took a taxi to my hotel, a small bed and breakfast in the old town that I'd chosen because it looked cozy and welcoming in the photos. The owner, a Scottish woman named Moira, greeted me with tea and shortbread and genuine warmth. "First time in Scotland?" she asked, and when I nodded, she smiled. "You'll love it here. There's something about this place that helps people find themselves." I spent the first day exploring Edinburgh, walking the Royal Mile and visiting the castle and getting lost in the winding medieval streets. Everything was new and different and fascinating. I felt like I was seeing the world with fresh eyes, like I'd been living in black and white for years and suddenly everything was in color. That evening, I sat in a pub near my hotel, drinking whiskey and listening to a traditional Scottish band play songs I'd only heard on recordings. The music was haunting and beautiful, and I found myself crying, not from sadness, but from a kind of overwhelming gratitude. I was here. I was actually here, doing something I dreamed about for years, but never thought I'd have the courage to do. On my second day, I took a train to the Highlands. The landscape was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. Rolling hills covered in purple heather, ancient stone circles standing sentinel in empty fields, locks that reflected the sky like mirrors. I felt connected to something larger than myself, something that had nothing to do with being anyone's mother, or teacher, or caretaker. I was Margaret Sullivan, 50-year-old woman, standing in the Scottish Highlands with the wind in her hair and the future spread out before her like an unmapped territory. It was on my third day that I finally turned on my phone. I had 63 missed calls and over 100 text messages, all from Michael. The progression of his messages told a story. The first few were confused. "Mom, I found your package. What's going on? Call me." Then they became worried. "Seriously, where are you? This isn't like you." Then panicked. "I'm calling the police if you don't answer your phone." Then desperate. "Please, please call me. I'm scared something happened to you." The most recent message, sent just an hour before I turned on my phone, was different. "I read your letter. All of it. I think I understand now. But please call me. I need to know you're safe." I called him from my hotel room, looking out at the view of Edinburgh Castle while I waited for him to answer. "Mom?" His voice was raw, like he'd been crying. "I'm safe, Michael. I'm in Scotland." "Scotland? Mom, what the hell? You can't just disappear like that. Do you have any idea how worried I've been? I called the police. I called all the hospitals. I thought you were dead." "I'm very much alive," I said calmly. "More alive than I've felt in years, actually." "This isn't funny, Mom. You scared the shit out of me. I wasn't trying to be funny. I was trying to make a point. There was a long silence. Then, about Mother's Day. About a lot of things. Mother's Day was just the final straw. Another silence. I could hear him breathing, could picture him running his hands through his hair the way he'd done since he was a little boy when he was upset or confused. I read your letter, he said finally. Multiple times. And? And I think you're right. About everything. About how I've been treating you. About how I've been taking you for granted. I didn't realize. His voice broke. I didn't realize how badly I'd been hurting you. I know you didn't, I said gently. That's part of the problem. I trained you not to see me as a person with feelings and needs and boundaries. I taught you that I would always be available, always be understanding, always put your needs ahead of my own. But that wasn't fair to either of us. So what happens now? He asked. Are you coming home? Eventually, but not yet. I'm going to finish my trip. I'm going to see the places I've dreamed about seeing. I'm going to remember who I am when I'm not trying to be everything to everyone else. How long will that take? I don't know. This trip is 10 days, but the bigger journey might take longer. I need to figure out who Margaret Sullivan is now that Michael Sullivan is grown up and living his own life. And then? And then we'll figure out what our relationship looks like going forward. What it looks like when it's based on mutual respect instead of one-sided obligation. I want that, he said quickly. I want to have a real relationship with you. I want to be a better son. Then we'll work on that together. But it's going to require changes from both of us. I need to stop being a doormat, and you need to stop treating me like one. Okay, he said. Yes, I want to change. I want to do better. Good. But Michael, I need you to understand something. This isn't about punishing you or making you feel guilty. This is about creating a relationship where we both feel valued and respected. I understand, he said. I think I understand. Will you call me? While you're there? I promise I won't try to guilt you into coming home early or anything. I want to know you're okay. And I want to hear about what you're doing. That surprised me. In all our recent conversations, he'd never shown much interest in what I was doing or how I was feeling. Are you really interested? I asked. Or are you just saying that because you're scared? Both, maybe, he admitted. But mostly interested. I realized, reading your letter, that I don't really know you anymore. Not the you that exists outside of being my mom. And I want to know that person. Okay, I said. I'll call you. Thank you. And Mom? I love you. I know I haven't been good at showing it lately, but I do love you. I love you too, sweetheart. That's why I had to do this. Over the next week, Michael called me every other day. But these conversations were different from any we'd had in years. Instead of the perfunctory check-ins I'd grown accustomed to, these were real conversations. He asked about the places I was visiting, the people I was meeting, the things I was learning about myself. I told him about hiking in the Highlands and feeling like I could conquer the world. I told him about visiting the Writers' Museum and standing in the room where Robert Burns had written some of his greatest poems. I told him about the Scottish woman I'd met on a tour bus who was traveling alone for the first time at age 75 because her husband had just died and she decided life was too short to wait for someday. You sound different, he said during one of our calls. Happier. More. I don't know. More like yourself. I feel like myself, I told him, for the first time in a long time. Tell me about that, he said. Tell me who you are when you're not being my mom. So I did. I told him about my love of literature, about the dreams I'd had before he was born, and the dreams I was rediscovering now. I told him about my job, really told him, Not just the complaints about difficult students or administrative frustrations that I usually shared, but the deep satisfaction I found in helping teenagers discover the power of words and stories. I told him about my garden, about how I'd learned to grow things from nothing, about the meditative peace I found in working with soil and seeds and seasons. I told him about my secret ambition to write a book someday, maybe a memoir about single motherhood or a guide for teachers working with at-risk students. "I never knew any of that," he said. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "You never asked," I said simply. "And I suppose I thought you wouldn't be interested. You were busy building your own life, chasing your own dreams. I didn't want to burden you with mine." "They're not burdens, Mom. They're part of who you are. I want to know all of it." On my last day in Scotland, I climbed Arthur's Seat, the extinct volcano that overlooks Edinburgh. It was a challenging hike for someone my age who didn't exercise regularly, but I was determined to reach the top. As I climbed, breathing hard and stopping frequently to rest, I thought about all the mountains I'd been afraid to climb, literally and metaphorically. At the summit, I stood looking out over the city I'd fallen in love with, and I made a promise to myself. I would never again make myself small to accommodate other people's comfort. I would never again hide my dreams because I was afraid they might inconvenience someone else. I would never again accept less than I deserved from the people I loved. The flight home felt different from the flight to Scotland. I wasn't running away from anything anymore. I was returning to my life, but as a different version of myself. Stronger, more certain of my worth, more willing to ask for what I needed instead of hoping someone would think to offer it. Michael was waiting for me at the airport, not because I'd asked him to be there, but because he'd offered, and when I'd hesitated, he'd insisted. "Please," he'd said during our last conversation in Scotland, "let me pick you up. Let me be the son who shows up for his mother at the airport." He looked different somehow when I saw him waiting at the gate. Older, more serious, like he'd aged years in the 10 days I'd been gone. When he hugged me, he held on longer than usual, and I could feel something different in his touch. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You look good, Mom," he said as we walked to baggage claim. "Really good. Different." "I feel different," I told him. "I feel like myself again." "Tell me about it. Tell me about everything." So I did. As we drove home, I told him about the castles and the highlands and the people I'd met. I told him about the Scottish woman who taught me to appreciate single malt whiskey, and the tour guide who'd recited Robert Burns' poetry with such passion that I'd cried. I told him about the bed and breakfast owner who'd become a friend, about the hiking group I joined for a day, about the sense of possibility that had followed me everywhere I went. "I want to see your pictures," he said. "All of them. And I want to hear more about this book you're thinking about writing." "Really?" "Really. I want to know everything. I want to know who my mother is now that I'm finally paying attention." That night, Michael insisted on taking me to dinner, not because it was a special occasion or because he felt obligated, but because he wanted to spend time with me. We went to a small Italian restaurant near my house, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was having dinner with a friend, not fulfilling a familial obligation. "I need to tell you something," he said over dessert. "While you were gone, I broke up with Amanda." I was surprised by this news, and even more surprised by my reaction to it. 2 months ago, I would have been secretly thrilled. Now, I just felt concerned for his well-being. "What happened?" I asked. "A lot of things. But mostly, I realized that I was becoming someone I didn't like when I was with her. Someone who thought it was okay to treat the people I loved like they were disposable. Someone who prioritized appearances over authenticity." He paused, stirring his coffee absently. "The morning after I found your letter, I tried to talk to Amanda about it. I tried to explain why I was so upset, why your disappearance had affected me so much. And she said, he shook his head. She said I was being dramatic. She said mothers are supposed to be understanding and supportive, and that if you couldn't handle being less important than her family, that was your problem, not mine. I'm sorry, I said, and meant it. I know you cared about her. I did, but I also realized that I didn't want to be with someone who couldn't understand why my mother mattered to me. I didn't want to build a life with someone who saw love as a competition instead of a collaboration. That's very mature of you, I said. I learned it from you, he replied. From your letter, from watching you choose yourself even when it was scary, from seeing what real strength looks like. 6 months later, Michael called to tell me he'd met someone new. Her name was Sarah, and she was a teacher like me, though she taught elementary school instead of high school. Instead of just announcing this new relationship and expecting me to be happy about it, he asked if he could bring her to dinner so I could meet her. I told her all about you, he said. About your trip to Scotland, about the book you're writing, about how proud I am to be your son. She's really excited to meet you. The dinner was wonderful. Sarah was warm and genuine, nothing like Amanda. She asked about my work, my travels, my writing. She complimented my cooking and asked for recipes. She treated me like a person worth knowing, not just an obstacle to be managed. Michael talks about you all the time, she told me as they were leaving. He's so proud of you. The way you changed your whole life, the way you refused to settle for less than you deserved. It's inspiring. He talks about me? I asked, surprised. Constantly, she said, laughing. Sometimes I think he loves you more than he loves me. But in a good way. In a way that makes me love him more. After they left, I sat in my living room thinking about how different this felt from Michael's relationship with Amanda. Sarah didn't see me as competition. She saw me as an integral part of Michael's life, someone whose presence made him a better person rather than someone whose influence needed to be minimized. The book I'd started writing in Scotland was published 2 years later. It was called The Geography of Independence, A Mother's Journey to Self-Discovery, and it chronicled my experience of learning to value myself after years of self-sacrifice. It didn't become a bestseller, but it touched a nerve with women who recognized their own stories in mine. I got letters from mothers who had been inspired to set boundaries with their adult children. I heard from women who had booked solo trips to places they'd always dreamed of visiting. I received emails from daughters who had realized they'd been taking their mothers for granted and wanted to change. Michael was my biggest cheerleader throughout the writing and publishing process. He read early drafts and offered feedback. He helped me navigate the world of agents and publishers. He threw me a book launch party and invited all our friends and family. I'm so proud of you, Mom, he said during his toast at the party. Not just for writing this book, but for having the courage to change your life when it wasn't working anymore. You taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself. Michael and Sarah got engaged on a hiking trip in Vermont, and this time, the wedding planning was completely different. Instead of being sidelined or taken for granted, I was included in every decision. Sarah asked my opinion on flowers and venues and music. Michael insisted that I give a speech at the reception. You're not just the mother of the groom, he said. You're the woman who taught me how to love properly. I want everyone to know that. The wedding was beautiful, but what made it special wasn't the flowers or the food or the perfect weather. What made it special was the feeling that I belonged there, that I was valued and respected and loved not just as Michael's mother, but as Margaret Sullivan, accomplished woman and cherished family member. During the father-son dance, which had been changed to a parent dance to include me, Michael looked into my eyes and said, "Thank you for disappearing that Mother's Day. Thank you for teaching me how to see you." "Thank you for learning how to look," I replied. 5 years after my trip to Scotland, Michael and Sarah gave me my first grandchild. A little boy they named Robert, after Robert Burns, because they said I taught them to appreciate poetry and Scotland and the importance of following your dreams. When I held Robert for the first time, I made him a different promise than the one I'd made to Michael 28 years earlier. I promised to love him unconditionally, but I also promised to teach him that love comes with responsibilities. That caring about someone means showing up for them, making them a priority, treating them with respect and consideration. I'm going to teach you that the people who love you are gifts, not conveniences, I whispered to him. And that appreciation is something you show with actions, not just words. Michael overheard me and smiled. He's lucky to have you as a grandmother, he said. We all are. That Mother's Day, 5 years after the Mother's Day that changed everything, Michael and Sarah threw me a party. Not just a dinner or a brunch, but a real party with all my friends and colleagues and family. They decorated the house with photos from my life, pictures from my trip to Scotland, photos from my book launch, images of me in my garden and my classroom, and all the places where I'd learned to be myself again. The centerpiece of the party was a large photo of me standing on Arthur's Seat in Edinburgh, arms raised in triumph, hair wild from the wind, face bright with joy and accomplishment. Under the photo was a plaque that read, Margaret Sullivan, Mother, Teacher, Author, Adventurer, Inspiration. This is who you are, Michael said when he presented it to me. Not just my mom, though you're the best mom in the world, but also all these other wonderful things, and I want to make sure everyone knows it. As I looked around at that party, at all the people who had gathered to celebrate not just my role as a mother, but my identity as a complete human being, I thought about that lonely Mother's Day 5 years earlier, about sitting in a restaurant alone, feeling invisible and unimportant and taken for granted. I thought about the gift I'd left for Michael that day, the book and the letter that had started this whole journey. About how sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is refuse to accept their worst behavior. About how sometimes you have to be willing to lose someone to teach them how to value you. That gift had seemed so small at the time, just a guidebook and a letter wrapped in brown paper. But it had changed everything. It had saved our relationship, transformed our family, and given me back my life. Now, surrounded by people who saw me and valued me and celebrated me for all the things I was, I realized that the real gift hadn't been the book or the letter. The real gift had been my willingness to choose myself, even when it was scary, even when it meant risking the most important relationship in my life. Because in choosing myself, I had taught Michael how to choose me too. And in learning how to value me, he had learned how to value himself and everyone else he would love for the rest of his life. The elderly woman in the restaurant that day so many years ago had been right to look at me with understanding. She had recognized a fellow traveler, someone who was about to learn that the greatest act of love is sometimes the hardest one, the act of demanding to be loved properly in return. That Mother's Day gift, wrapped in brown paper and left on a doorstep, had been more than just a book and a letter. It had been a declaration of independence, a demand for respect, and a lesson in how to love someone without losing yourself in the process. And every Mother's Day since then, as I've watched Michael become the kind of man who shows up for the people he loves, who treats his wife and his child and his mother with genuine care and consideration, I've known that it was the most important gift I ever gave him. Not because it was expensive or beautiful, but because it taught him that the people we love deserve our best efforts, not our leftovers. That appreciation is an action, not just a feeling. And that the greatest way to honor someone you love is to see them, really see them, for all the complex, wonderful, deserving things they are. The gift I left behind that Mother's Day wasn't just for Michael. It was for me too. It was permission to stop being invisible in my own life, to stop accepting crumbs when I deserved a feast, to stop hiding my light under a bushel because I was afraid it might make other people uncomfortable. And now, as I watch my son raise his own child with the lessons I taught him about respect and appreciation and genuine love, I know that the gift keeps giving. That the courage I found to choose myself that day has rippled out into the world in ways I never could have imagined. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is teaching them how to lose you before they actually do. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't appreciate you, even when those people are the ones you love most in the world. That Mother's Day, I learned that love without respect isn't really love at all. It's just habit dressed up in pretty words. And I decided I deserve better than that. We all do.